Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for making it on time for this session, immediately after lunch as well. But very pertinent conversation, especially after we've enjoyed the beautiful food that has come from rural areas. For this session itself, I'd like it to be very collaborative, have all of us talking to each other, answering questions or asking questions. So we'd like you to be highly engaged, noting that it's one of the final sessions of the GOGLA event. So quick introduction, all protocols observed. So the description itself is shared, but I'd like to highlight that access to climate smart and sustainable cooling can accelerate SDG 7 and catalyze equitable, resilient development for rural populations in a warming world. Some of the purpose of actually having this meeting today is that the cooling conversation has been left behind, but we have a great opportunity to bring it forward and to define the synergies in this nexus where the development needs of low energy access countries, access to cooling and access to electricity intersect and positively reinforce one another. Also to demonstrate that climate-friendly, distributed renewable energy and high performance of off-grid appropriate appliances can provide both clean electricity and sustainable cooling access by leveraging the technological, operational, and financial innovations developed by the private sector, who are here in the room, governments in the room as well, donors, and development partners. Lastly, the purpose is to make the case for mainstreaming access to cooling. Without further ado, I'd like to request the panelists to join me on stage and to have Ben at the podium. Thank you. Thank you. Now that we have the panelists here, I'll take a further opportunity to introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Wangeshi-Shega, the moderator for the session, Energy Efficiency and Cooling Specialist at SE for All, and Volunteer Africa Regional Network, Chair of the World Green Building Council. We'll have Ben scene setting and presenting the case for action on cooling. Ben, do you want to take it away? Thank you. Not yet. No? How about now? There's a definite no.
Oh, there we go. Okay, lights on. Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone, and like Elizabeth said, thank you for joining us after lunch. We hope this can be an interesting session and shed some light on a nexus issue, which is really pertinent to this forum. So my name is Ben Hartley. I'm a principal specialist in energy efficiency and cooling at Sustainable Energy for All. I just want to start by thanking GOGLA for having me and the World Bank ASMAP team for the partnership on working to make this issue more and more important and more ingrained in electricity access interventions and in rural development. And I think you already heard the pitch for the session after, but just a reminder that in the same room there will be a session on commercial viability for walk-in cold storage off-grid directly after this. So I will start, if I can make this work. There we go. So this is the agenda for today. I'll do a quick scene setting, and then I'll pass it back over to the panel, who will do an introduction. That will be followed by another presentation from Riley, and then a longer panel discussion with questions and Q&A. So moving into the next one, just going to make sure I've got my notes. So in terms of access to cooling and why it's a development and climate challenge, there are a lot of reasons, right? We know heat stress is a big problem. I think in 2019, the measurement was that over 350,000 people died from heat stress or something associated with it just that year alone, which eclipsed previous estimates significantly. Productivity, we know there's a significant productivity impact from heat. By 2030, the estimate is the equivalent of 80 million full-time jobs lost because of it. Food, for perishable crops, this cooling is really significant. And for those perishable crops, up to 80% post-harvest losses are experienced in some African countries. There's an energy impact associated with that, which you would have heard if you were in the last session here as well in this room. But in general, the energy demand for cooling is another big issue which has real climate and development consequences. It's estimated to potentially triple by 2050 for buildings alone. And then I think finally the equity impact is important. Without exception, it's the poor and the vulnerable who suffer the most because they lack access to cooling. So one of the key messages is just cooling is not a luxury. It's an issue of equity that's essential to delivering the SDGs. So I want to talk now quickly about how we at SE4L measure risk. It's not black and white. It's risk for access to cooling. It's not black and white. It's across the spectrum, and it covers, do you have access to electricity? What's your income? Do you have access to cold chains for food and for medicines? And do you have refrigeration? Risk lowers with energy, income, and access to cold chains, and you go up to medium risk. And our focus today, I think, on rural populations, I think one thing to highlight is electricity access is a key factor in a warming world. It enables access to fans, refrigerators, et cetera, higher value agricultural production. And while, urban populations will have heat stress risks related to the urban heat island effect and a couple other bits, I think rural populations, their risks are more broad because of the reliance and the cooling need for cold chains to deliver vaccines and food. So our analysis, we do it every year, 1.2 billion people at high risk because they lack access to sustainable cooling, about 2.5 billion at medium risk. This year, that includes about 371 million people who are the rural poor, and that's sort of the focus for our session here today. So just focusing on the graph on the top left and the green line, that's the rural poor in Africa. Some things that we're seeing in Africa are the fact that among 31 high-impact countries for access to cooling, those countries account for 50%, half of the rural poor population globally. And there are food security issues associated with cooling in Egypt, Nigeria, Algeria, Morocco, Cameroon, and Angola, among others. So to flip right on. So this year at SE4L, we did a different analysis. We tried to look at 2030. What happens in 2030 if we meet our electrification goals associated with SDG 7.1 and we end extreme poverty? And one of the things that we found was that globally, this reduces the number of people at high risk by 430 million people. What does this mean for Africa, and what does it mean for rural populations? So in Africa, I missed, sorry, I gotta go back, excuse me. So again, this graph on the top right, oh, sorry, I mixed up, guys. I'll go to the right slide. So this is the 2030 analysis to go back. Essentially, in Africa, what we see if we achieve SDG 7.1 and 1.1, there's a significant reduction in the number of people at high risk. We saw in particular is that full electrification and an end to extreme poverty, the number of rural poor reduces down to just 17 million among that 181.7. So significant reductions in cooling access risk when you achieve full electrification. So the implication is that access to electricity, key enabler. So we also want to just sort of visualize what this nexus is. This slide is indicative, but it should give you an idea of what we're talking about here. There are high-impact countries for access to cooling. There are high-impact countries for access to electricity, and some of them do overlap. So there are probably more that should be included here, and the opportunities, especially in the agricultural value chain, which is not so easy to measure in terms of access to cooling, go well beyond these countries. So moving right along. So to drill down a bit, the linkages between cooling and energy for rural populations can be summarized in a few points. For rural populations in hot climates without energy access, risks are faced because they don't have the electricity they need to even run a fan, which could save their life in a heat wave. First tiers of energy access reduce risk, but appliance innovation for poor rural populations has not necessarily seen the same level of investment and attention as appliance innovation for sort of maybe urban populations with higher income. And a lack of higher tier access, affordability issues, put refrigerators and ACs out of risk and out of reach in off-grid settings. So if we sort of accept that access to cooling isn't a luxury for rural people, it has implications for how we meet the energy access challenge in a warming world. Demands and needs are rising. We know that because of the heat. And that gives us reason to prioritize things like planning for access to cooling in electrification planning in rural settings, and to take a nexus approach for these populations at high risk. And there are a lot of benefits to this type of nexus approach. So energy access lowers risks caused by a lack of access to cooling, and electrical powered cooling in turn enables economic productivity in schools, in the workplace, and especially in farms, as you'll sort of hear later in the session. Passive cooling, no energy at all. These solutions can work in off-grid settings, in rural poor settings. And in theory, what that does is it reduces the amount of energy that's needed for other services, right? So there's a benefit there to electrification. And given the extreme risk, extreme rise in energy demand for cooling, it's an opportunity to address both rural electrification and climate. So I know I need to hurry, this is my last slide. So, I mean, a couple more stats. There we go, thanks, Leo. In 2050, there'll still be about 1.6 billion people in the top, rural people in the top 9 countries for access to cooling risk as measured by us. And mortality risk from heat is at least equivalent in rural areas as it is to urban dwellers, according to some new research. Talked a lot of statistics, right? But I think, fundamentally, the opportunity comes down to rural people and the opportunities that a nexus approach provides for rural development. Rural populations have consistently lagged behind on energy access. We in this room know that. And now we're still seeing the same equity gap on access to cooling. This translates into a systematic lack of the resources needed to adapt to climate change compared to urban dwellers. And in the chart, you can sort of see some examples of how this approach can help people. This includes like the productivity impacts that I've mentioned, and the fact that efficient cooling appliances and passive cooling can free up energy for other needs while meeting cooling needs. Also, of course, upscaling agricultural production and the links to mini-grid development. So, to conclude, I've gone on. I just want to thank everyone again and reiterate that in a warming world, cooling's not a luxury. It's an issue of equity, and delivering it in a sustainable way is critical to just equitable energy transitions. And as a productive use that supports growth, it can support electrification efforts wholeheartedly. So thank you very much. I'll turn the floor back to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Ben, for setting the scene. I think we all accept that we are in a warming world. It's not in the future, it's actually happening, especially in Africa and the rural areas. So the aspect around cooling and rural areas, as Ben has showed, cooling is not a luxury, it's actually a basic need that should be prioritized in electrification planning. So now I'd like to bring in the panel, and the question to the panel is, please introduce yourselves, your organizations as well, and what you're actually working on this critical aspect. If I may start with Leo, working towards Andy. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth, and I hope you can hear me well. It's a great way to start, because actually this piece of work is a co-founded work initiated by Sustainable Energy for All, Cooling for All team. And I think I'm representing SMAP, Clean and Efficient Cooling Team of the World Bank. And we were brought this initiative actually by Damilola some years back, and as a way to bring together the energy access work that both our organizations had done and to bring cooling to the forefront. Our program has been really fortunate to have been funded by KSEP at the beginning, thanks to here in Kigali, the Kigali Convention. And we use this funding inside the World Bank to provide small grants and technical assistance research to the World Bank core projects and the governments to understand better how cooling could enhance existing projects. So we've really been paying attention to cooling for many years, and then the vaccine crisis hit. And suddenly our team was pulled into healthcare work. We've worked with some of you there, but most of our team's expertise has been either in building efficiency in the urban area, And I think I'd just like to pick up on one point there was the first thing that we all heard of was mitigation, mitigation, mitigation. How can people who often didn't create the problem reduce their needs to not further exacerbate a problem, to be controversial? One approach, especially in Africa where those challenges happen. But what we didn't hear was adaptation. Now, the World Bank is here to serve clients, other governments. And actually, how many of those governments want to borrow money in order to mitigate by reducing more of that impact was a lot less than those that would actually borrow the money to adapt, to help their people, to help their economy get through this transition. That alone was quite a breakthrough in thinking, and I'd like us just to think about it like that. Who are we here to serve? Most of us from the energy access background. We were, so we looked into energy access and agriculture as the main area for food security. So our team works with many of the World Bank agriculture teams, which has really helped us understand. A question was raised earlier in productive use. How many of you in a room like this are agriculture specialists? We had about 6. So, well, thankfully we have a lot more than that at the World Bank, and they really are some of the best in the world. And so what we've been doing is bringing our energy team into the ag teams to serve them, to understand their needs, and to realize that they have the whole framework of a lot of this figured out, and they just need expertise to assist in implementing. So we've had that opportunity. We're looking at about $1.2 billion of agriculture programs already that have a cold chain components that we're looking at supporting. And the last thing I'd like to, if I may, is wanting to address this point of the heat stress in rural areas. Many of us here, I believe, I certainly am one of them, who was here because I was inspired by the fact that today, being 25 years ago, people were still living using flame-based lighting as their modern source of lighting. And it was an issue of equity and injustice that impassioned so many of us. And I've been working for that for a long time, as many of us here have. When I started to hear this about cooling, I'd like you to consider, is there not a similar kind of feeling that these people are now having no ability to deal with cooling other than, if they're lucky, by a fan? That's it, a fan. That's the best we can do right now, apparently, because that's what's out there. So if you look at the trends, we're very lucky if our programs, off-grid lighting companies are selling fans. It's very small, it's a niche market, it's growing a little bit. And where I got this was in our World Bank project in Pakistan. The government of Pakistan had enough support for 200,000 solar home system subsidized program. Just about to roll it out, doing the due diligence. And some of you here from there can qualify this to me. The shocker was that actually no one was willing to pay for a solar home system unless it could power their fan. There it is, right there. Not one of any, I've never heard that being defined as a problem before. It's as if we just stumbled across it. So there's some real life evidence. They were integrated. The first time in the world, I think, where we really looked at having integrated standards for solar fans and solar home systems. Project's very challenged. Things are hard in Pakistan, but that project has been succeeding, and we're starting to see more innovations on new technologies that could serve rural people. So I was hoping we could plant the seed with some of you who are working in these areas. You know, do you want to take up this challenge? Is it a challenge? Do you think there's a need there? We'd like to show you that there is, and I hope we can do our little part in addressing that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Leo. Over to you, Riley.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, so I'm from CLASP, which is an international nonprofit organization. And at CLASP, in partnership with the Energy Savings Trust through Efficiency for Access, we work to accelerate the uptake of high quality and affordable off-grid cooling solutions. So we do this through several different initiatives. First, we run a Global Leap Awards competition, which is an international competition to identify best-in-class emerging technologies. So to date, we've run 3 cooling-related competitions. These are for fans, refrigerators, and then we're just wrapping up an off-grid cold chain challenge. We also support product testing and quality assurance. So we test products, share data about them, and then also develop quality criteria frameworks for off-grid cooling products. So to date, we've tested over 100 refrigerators, as well as 135 fans. We also support research of different topics on off-grid cooling, from user experience to performance data trends, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this already at some of the sessions. We also have an R&D fund, and this supports innovations for new and emerging technologies. So we have run one off-grid cooling-related R&D fund. And then lastly, we support communications and disseminations of best practices and learnings of all those activities I just described.
Thank you, Riley, for that. We'll move on to Mr. Morris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm coming well. Can you hear me? Good. So my name is Maurice Kaitare. I work with the UN Environment. And very interesting, I used to work with the Rwanda Energy Group 5 years ago, and when we would go to events like this, you would not hear anything about cooling. 5 years later, now we have a room full of people talking about cooling, and not only here, we have different sessions talking about that. And so it's really exciting. And it all started here in this building, 2016, when there was an amendment of the Montreal Protocol, which is called the Kigali Amendment. It happened in 2016, and that's when cooling started to gain traction. UNEP, partnering with the government of Rwanda, put in place the Rwanda Cooling Initiative, which I started to lead, and on the Rwandan side, and my colleague Brian right there was leading it from the UNEP side. And we started to develop the national cooling strategy in Rwanda. And it's really interesting to see what is happening now 5 years later, that really cooling is being thought of as a solution. When we were looking at it that time 5 years ago, we were actually looking at it in terms of environment protection. Now it's beyond that. We're actually looking at socio-economic development. We're looking at what can it actually play in people's lives and what development can it bring, and I think we'll be talking about that later. But to just briefly tell you what we've been able to do in these 5 years, we've developed the National Cooling Strategy. It highlights 6 key interventions that the government of Rwanda should do. And among those, we have the most ambitious on the continent, minimum energy performance standards for cooling equipment. So the government of Rwanda in 2019 adopted the most ambitious MEPs, and they've been enforced until now. We've also been able to develop financing mechanisms for commercial cooling appliances, as well as domestic refrigeration. And I'm sure we'll probably be able to talk about that in more details. But probably the most exciting that everyone has been talking about so far is the cold chain. We've developed the African Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling Cold Chain, ACES, which also comes from the National Cooling Strategy. And I will be able to talk about that in depth, but yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we've been able to do.
Thank you for sharing that around Rwanda. And now we move on to Andrew Amadi.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and fellow panelists. My name is Andrew Amadi, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Renewable Energy Association, also known as KEREA. So KEREA is about 20 years old now, and we've walked through a journey of growth and seen quite a lot of transformation happening from having these kind of conversations. I think Leo will remember we did this about lighting, and we are happy to announce that I think today you will almost not find anybody using kerosene for lighting anymore. So this gives me hope that we can do it again. We need to do it again. And what we're doing at KEREA is, KEREA came up with a strategic plan about 3 years ago, and the first result was to hire a CEO and to have a fully fledged secretariat and to be able to take on the real issues and not just to be reactive to what is going on. So to be proactive in engagement with what matters. And cooling matters. The future, the growth of renewable energy. Whenever people talk to me about energy and they say we want solar, we want this or that kind of energy, the first question I ask is, what do you want it for? And myself, I've been an energy auditor for the last 14 years. I have done energy audits from domestic small houses to large industries, and across the board, cooling in any way, shape, or form is one of the most important uses and major uses of energy. There's a Swedish professor, I think the late, I forget his name, Hans Rosling, yes. He described it in terms of lines. So we have the light line, that's the lowest level of energy. The next is the cooling line, and that's where we are today. So we are looking at how to move people with energy. I passionately believe that energy, renewable energy specifically, can be able to move people from poverty into what you might call decency, or some refer to as the middle class. And cooling is a major milestone. So we're looking at it from the productive use angle and the importance of cooling in value chains, in systems. You've heard the word, the cold chain. And that is what unlocks full potential, if you like, of, and potential of people to participate in the formal economy. Kenya has, I think you heard the statistics there, one of the highest post-harvest losses. And Kenya is a water-stressed country. It's not self-evident that there's a connection between water and cooling, but there is, because if you are a water-stressed country, and we are feeling it right now more than ever before, the worst drought in 40 years, water is a precious asset for food production. So if you have 40% losses and you are a water-stressed country, then you are losing a valuable resource that can sustain life and livelihoods. And so when we did the plan for the productive use of renewable energy, we looked at it from a holistic perspective. We say that we don't just want to look at things in isolation. Yes, we will kickstart with solar water pumping. Yes, we do need solar water pumping urgently. But as quickly as we can deploy that, we need to deploy refrigeration, because come harvest, regardless of if it is being done on a domestic or on a commercial or on a business level, when you produce that food, you will need to cool it. You will need to have the systems to be able to preserve, to extend the life, if you like, the utility of that water. So that is how we're looking at it. And my personal, I like to think in terms of numbers. I like to frame the problem in terms of magnitude. How many assets are required? Refrigeration. And I say, as much as water is a right, cooling follows very closely. It has been considered a luxury. We still have 35% duty on refrigerators, on solar refrigerators, that Kenya and Uganda increased the customs duty on refrigerators. They say for 1 year, but we know that 1 year has translated to 2 years, to 3 years, and we need to address this. So as Kerea,
thank you. What I was going to say is we don't want to give all the secrets immediately. Before we give all the numbers, we can deep dive a bit later into the numbers, if you don't mind. so that I can invite Riley to come onto the stage, do the presentation, and then we can deep dive into those numbers that you are willing to share with our audience. So please bear with us. Please stay with us for those numbers that Andy is going to share. Thank you.
Am I audible? Yes, I am. Thanks, Elizabeth.
So we might thank you for that.
Thank you. All right, so for this presentation, I'm going to focus on 3 high-impact off-grid cooling products, and these are evaporative air coolers, refrigerators, specifically light commercial and household use, and fans. As you can see from this chart, these products are at various stages of market maturity, and I'm going to dive into some of the market trends for each. It's also important to note that there are many other off-grid cooling products along this value chain, but for this presentation, I'm just going to focus on these 3. So first up is evaporative air coolers. So evaporative air coolers are a promising technology that can deliver cooling at a more affordable price compared to air conditioners. Evaporative air coolers use the evaporation effect to create cold air, and then they have a fan within the unit that'll blow that cold air out. They're most effective in low humidity, dry regions, so they're kind of region specific. We're seeing DC compatible evaporative air coolers emerging in some markets. So for example, Efficiency for Access did a market survey of off-grid retail shops in Pakistan, and we found that there were several models and brands available of DC evaporative air coolers, and interestingly, a lot of them were being locally produced, locally manufactured in Pakistan. However, there's still little market research or data available on these products, and so if any of you in the audience know more about the availability or demand for evaporative air coolers, we'd love to hear from you. All right, next up is fans. So fans provide cost-effective cooling that can be life-saving, particularly for people living in high-temperature areas. Compared to other appliances, fans are relatively low cost, and this means they have really high demand and also really high sales. And they're one of the most common off-grid products in the world. So for fans and refrigerators, we're also going to look at some of the efficiency and price trends over the last 5 years. And this data came from Verisol test data, so these are products that we tested, and they're sourced either from off-grid retail shops or submitted directly from manufacturers. So for fan efficiency, we're seeing really significant increases in fan efficiency. This is primarily due to the integration of brushless DC motors, or BLDC motors, which are very efficient and also a quick win for manufacturers to get those efficiency gains. We're also seeing a pretty good decrease in price by 25% between 2017 and 2022. Moving on to refrigerators. Refrigerators are one of the most demanded appliances with high impact potential as well. However, the market for refrigerators is still relatively nascent. We're seeing low sales. Approximately 7,000 units were sold in 2021, according to Google sales data, as well as low market penetration. I'm going to talk a little bit more later on about some of the impacts of refrigerators, but we're seeing that a lot of people are using these for small business use, and this is having a pretty significant impact on quality of life. I'm also quickly going to walk through the different off-grid refrigerator types. So there's 3 main types that we're looking at. The first is DC household refrigerators and freezers, and these are designed to be used with a solar system, and they're typically more efficient. Solar direct drive refrigerators, which are an adapted technology from vaccine refrigerators. Now more companies are designing these for household use. They connect directly to a PV panel, and they typically include an integrated thermal battery like ice storage. And then lastly is conventional AC refrigerators. So these are refrigerators that are meant to be used with the grid. However, some users will use them with a solar system and then an inverter. These are typically less efficient, but they're also currently one of the most commonly available types of refrigerators for off-grid consumers. And then on the right, you'll see this spider chart, which is different metrics we looked at for the different refrigerator types. The closer to the edge is the better the refrigerator is performing. So as you can see from this, there really are trade-offs for each refrigerator type. And then again, looking at efficiency and price for refrigerators, we're seeing really significant improvements in efficiency over the last 5 years. This is primarily due to improved technologies such as improved insulation, more efficient compressors, so very promising on that. We did see a slight increase in refrigerator price, up by 3%. But then for certain refrigerator segments, we are seeing decreases such as refrigerator freezers and also the solar direct drive refrigerators I mentioned earlier. And then opportunities to scale, we're only looking at refrigerators and fans because we don't have enough data on evaporative air coolers. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the affordability challenge already at this conference, and this is particularly true for refrigerators because there's such a high cost for rural off-grid consumers. Policy is very important, one, to enable the distribution of high quality products, and also to support enabling policies. For instance, refrigerators, one of the biggest costs for the system is actually VATs and duties, as you were discussing before. So creating a way to bring in these products and make them more affordable will be key, as well as quality and performance. So we want to make sure these products are performing well and they're meeting the needs of end users. And speaking of quality, I'm going to talk about this quality criteria that SE for All and CLASP developed for off-grid cooling products. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the multi-tier framework, but the multi-tier framework allows us to measure energy access in a non-binary tiered approach. And we actually wanted to take a similar approach when we were developing this off-grid cooling quality criteria. So what we did is we created a tool that development programs, financiers, and others can use to identify high quality fans, refrigerators, and evaporative air coolers. And so we took kind of the same model as the multi-tier framework, and we basically developed these different measurement indicators which are dependent on the technology type. And so you'll see on the right is the example of the fan measurement indicators. And one great thing about this framework is that we've created these like necessary metrics, which are the ones highlighted teal. And this is what we would consider essential to evaluating a product. And then development programs, whoever is using this, can customize and pick and choose the other metrics to see if they want to include this in their program's design. Another unique feature about this is that you can actually, we have an Excel tool that you can use, so you can plug in data consumption, power consumption, and it'll show you the multi-tier framework, the multi-tier energy supply that it's compatible with, as well as how long it can run on that tier. So we published all of this information in the publication on the left, which you'll see, so recommended for you to check it out, and then we can also send you that Excel tool if it's something you're interested in using for your program. And then quickly talking about what's next for supporting high quality off-grid cooling solutions. Verisol has developed draft quality standards for off-grid refrigerators, and we're going to launch a certification for these in 2023. And this will enable companies to certify both their standalone refrigerator as well as refrigerators sold with a solar home system kit. At the same time, in parallel, United for Efficiency is developing model guidelines for off and weak good refrigerators, and they utilize the Verisol quality standards kind of as a baseline, and then they're setting more ambitious targets to really drive the market towards high quality products. So I hope that was helpful for an overview of what we're seeing for cooling technologies, kind of the tools you have to identify high quality products, and then what we're going to be working on in the next couple of years.
Thank you. Thank you, Riley, for that presentation that really brings in the conversation around the equipment. I'd like to now come back to the panelists and specifically Leo. If, for example, we have this nexus. What does it mean to you, and how can we harness the opportunities around it and harness off-grid electricity in a lot of this support for access for cooling, especially for the rural areas?
Thank you. There's a lot there. Just as I've been thinking about this a little bit for a while. But seriously, I think the main point that I hope I'd like to recap some of the slides that we did earlier, so you can remember them. But what I'd say that the nexus for me really just jumped out when, in order to answer that, I just want to give a bit more background information, and that was the fact that there is this Chilling Prospects series that SE for All, Calling for All team has been working on for, Ben, I'll put you on the spot, how many years? 5 years, okay?
Yeah.
Not sure how many of us have heard of it. Oh, yeah, give an indication. How many people are familiar with the Chilling Prospects series? Yeah, great. I won't ask how many of you have read them, but that is great. I've been focused on, and to Andrew's point, I think many of us I've been focused on lighting or kits or energy kits or selling a product, selling an appliance. And I think a lot of the attention of most of this sector has been there. And quite frankly, I've been, yeah, this looks interesting, looks relevant, but I've got to focus on this area. So I never really dug into them too much. So what for me was revolutionary was learning there was a program at the World Bank which was then committed to this work. And so what's the nexus? It's actually that overlapping area, that there are people with different problems, if you like, that magnify each other, that amplify each other, that have therefore similar solutions. That we had that overlapping area where someone who lacks access to electricity, intrinsically therefore, is going to have a problem accessing cooling. Yep. Because the majority of cooling solutions are, modern cooling solutions at least, are electrically powered. So for me, it was finding that out, but with the nexus being that area where there is the sweet spot, where there is the overlap, and so that a problem becomes an opportunity. Because for commercial businesses, so we noticed that the problem of people lacking cooling, for you, I wonder if you can look at some of those heat maps and where people are, you know, a government needs to then see the implication for your electricity access if people have different kinds of needs, you know, and then you're going to have different levels of impact of lacking access to electricity. Yeah? It's not like water, where it's very, you've got to get the water from somewhere. What I found surprising with the cooling was that it's literally, if you can have access to electricity, you can power that fan, yeah. You can change, you have the power to control your environment. And that Nexus facility there really is something that hadn't been, I think, we're familiar with. So we wanted to define this, that there are two sides of the similar coin, especially when you introduce the phrase climate friendly, because then what we found was introducing cooling in that climate friendly way is what we're already doing. They happen to be solar powered because that's what's needed for many of these environments. But then that itself, especially if you're in Nigeria, replacing a generator powered fridge with a solar powered fridge, just right there, yes, you are making mitigation, real mitigation benefits, especially in a country like Nigeria where I think there's more power created by generators than there is by the national grid.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that was the real eye-opener, that there's, to use one of our great founder, Russell Sturm's term, there's a there. So I think in the Nexus, that is the there that I hope I helped describe it.
Fantastic. I think you described it quite well, and a lot of people are realizing, especially now with the heat stress, you know, all over the world, the first thing you can do is actually get cooling equipment, if you can afford it, if it's available, if you have electricity. I'd like to move on to Maurice. With your experience in Rwanda, could you give us your experience on how to integrate cooling in electricity planning, which you mentioned that you had started, or you have started working on that, especially in Rwanda?
Thank you, and I'm glad to speak after Leo because he just pointed out the there, which is exactly what I want to pick up from. With my experience, and I've worked with, like I pointed out earlier, with electrification before I moved to cooling, and I was able to champion the rural electrification strategy in Rwanda Before then, I moved on to work on the national cooling strategy. So electrification and cooling are my past. So I've looked at this, and exactly what Leo said, these are two sides of the same coin. If you talk about electrification alone, you're basically telling people, I'm going to give you a solar kit, for example, but you're going to start to pay for it. But where do you get money to pay for it? Your income comes from agriculture. I am not enhancing your productivity in agriculture, but I'm asking you to deplete your income to pay for the solar kit. I don't look at it like that. I think it's two sides of the same coin. You should be talking about cooling, cold chain, which enhances the productivity so that they can be able to afford electricity. If you're looking at it in one area, if you're talking about cooling alone, how is he going to be able to do cooling if he doesn't have electricity? And also, if you're talking about electricity alone, how is he going to be able to afford? So we're talking about affordability here, and we're talking about sustainability. If we have seen, and I was in electrification before, and we have seen electrification in off-grid areas go up and go down because people committed and they could not sustain. So the off-grid companies had a way to come and retrieve the equipment. So really, that's where there is, and it's very interesting. So on this side of the African Center of Excellency for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain, to which I am the general manager, we are looking to enhance the cooling by putting up a Center of Excellency, which will be a model to develop business models, to make sure that cooling is sustainable, to make sure that people in the rural communities do understand the impact of cooling, how that is going to transform their lives, to make sure these technologies are tested there, these technologies are certified from there, and to make sure that these technologies are available and people know them, and awareness. So it's really going to be a center that is based here in Rwanda, in Kigali. As a matter of fact, there's a campus. It's hosted within the University of Rwanda, so the university has provided a campus. And it's going to have spokes across Rwanda and in the region. It's an African Center of Excellency. We are developing right now a spoke in Kenya, and a spoke is basically a satellite that mimics what we have at the center here. And we want to look at cooling holistically. Talking about how is cooling powered. We're talking about the sources of electricity. We're talking about solar. So there's a lot there, and I invite you all to really look at what the Center of Excellence is trying to do.
Thank you, and you've heard the invite to look at what the Center of Excellence is actually doing, and you're here, so opportunity to do that. Coming back to the conversation around cooling is the new lighting, because you've both mentioned that you were involved in where we came from, where we're using kerosene for schools or people studying at night, to where we are now. Most people know what an LED light or efficient lighting is. What do you see as the best solutions, especially for Kenya? You mentioned about the drought, to address cooling, this cooling needs for the rural people, and noting about the food chain, the link to that as well. And how do we enable that in the rural village? How do they know we are actually talking about this, or we're trying to find solutions about this as well? Pinpointing towards Kenya in the situation that's ongoing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question, and the way that I see it is I look at it from the lens of an energy auditor. And in that lens, you look at it from the life cycle cost. So we don't quantify the losses. And one of the most difficult things in being able to quantify that value of that loss is what is the lowest common denominator that we need to use to determine what I can call comfort levels. What is the level of accepted comfort for a person? So when we look at it from that lens and we say, apart from just looking at the, say, physical thermal comfort, which we say is maybe between 18 to 21 degrees, but if we look at it from a nutritional point of view, how much of post-harvest losses affects people's well-being in terms of their own health, their livelihoods, and what is the economic cost of those losses? If we were to look at it from that angle, then we would say that if you make this capital investment for every village, for example, what is the value of the loss of meat because you don't have refrigeration? I was talking about it yesterday that I've had some meat in the freezer for almost 4 to 5 months that I can still go back to. If I was in the village, the people in the village, in 1 weekend it's gone bad. What is the energy loss of cooking with, whether it's efficient or not, and most likely it's not efficient, and having to either eat that quickly or throw it away because there's no way to preserve it. So there is economics around this. There is opportunity cost that we are blind to because we have accepted that some people do not deserve to have what others do. So when we agree that everybody deserves a certain minimum, and it's so sad for me that it's only in this year that it's coming out from a top government level that a policy instruction is issued that nobody should die from famine. We have been used to hearing 5 million people, 10 million people are at risk. We are desensitized to the trauma of what's actually happening. So as we look at this, as we look at the well-being, as we look at the transition, then we can be able to look and say, it's worth it. It's worth having refrigeration in every village. There's a case for it. There's, at the heart of it is that the people deserve better.
Thank you, Andrew, for that. And I see, Leo, you'd like to add to that before we go to Riley for...
Yes, please.
And then we invite everyone. I see questions coming up as well.
We've got quite a few already, so then I won't respond to them. But I really want to pick up. So that was great, like literally, I think when we coin the phrase, what does it mean? What is being meant by cooling is the new lighting? For me, one key point, what was lighting? What was new about lighting? So I guess it's pretty clear, but we're all here thanks to Lighting and Lighting Africa being the name of the first program that brought us this far with IFC and the World Bank. I was fortunate enough to be there at the beginning there. What we looked at was the fact and why it was possible because, and Jeff Prins made this point earlier, what's the role of efficiency? There's some points here about it. Well, the fact was that before efficiency, when I started off in the early 2000s, you had what was the smallest LED bulb that one could power with the solar system? Car indicator lights, yeah? Plucked off the car. Mark Hankins here, a bit of wire with a battery. The battery was carried to the village, charged in the village. The battery was carried back. A few little bulbs off cars with wires hanging around. It was about a 10-watt bulb, I believe. 15-watt bulbs. One bulb, dim, that was what lit a room. Yeah, then we get 5-watt compact fluorescent bulbs. Quite a revolution, got mercury in them. They can break incredibly easily. They're generally poor quality, what you get in most places in Africa. It's 25 years ago, 15 years ago. LEDs started to come in, and we get where we're going with this, right? And so we saw the LED bulb, and that was a revolution that of efficiency that delivered the end product, which was called light. So lighting was recognized as a basic need, that it was an equity issue, and it crowded in a lot of donors, to be blunt. I think many companies, it crowded them in as well. We had the biggest and best world's organizations crowded in to try and solve the lighting problem. They're not the ones who are here now, having reached millions of people, let's just put it that way. And so they needed dedication and devotion. So what I mean by cooling being the new lighting is that cooling has the potential to revolutionize lives in that way, that it needs to be recognized as potentially as a basic need, and then needs the kind of support and the enabling environment that lighting has had. Definitely. And I believe we just don't have that right now. So maybe we have some efficiency gains, but I would challenge, and it'd be interesting to hear from the specialists in the room, really, are we there yet? Or do we need some more? Do we need the LED equivalent in cooling, or is that already here?
Thank you for that. And you mentioned 20 to 15 years, so we really hope that the minds in the room, it doesn't take that long. 2030 is around the corner, and we already see that we're so way behind on this by making it a basic need. I'd like to ask Riley, from your work, where do cooling appliances stack up in terms of preference for off-grid consumers in Africa? So how does that stack up at the moment?
Yeah, I have a quick slide I'm going to share.
Okay, do you have the slide to get the numbers? But as the slide is coming up, I'd like to ask one of the questions, and thank you for putting your questions up on Slido. I see Emilian got in there very early, and I'd like to encourage all of you to pose your questions. Seeing the positive impact of refrigerators, it's disappointing to see low level of penetration, which I believe is lack of financing. How can we overcome this lack of financing? Leo, you want to take that? While we get the slide up.
I'd hand to Maurice, but just a quick one. I'd throw it back. You've assumed that that's a problem and that it's necessary. I think we come to the first point Andrew made. Selçuk Tanatar, IFC, running the Tech Emerge program in Nigeria. His great point is, so, you have a tomato, you sell the tomato, how much you sell it for? How much did you lose? You chill a tomato, how much did it cost to chill it? How much more can you sell it for? That's how much you can spend on your chilling. So, are you saying that every rural household should have a fridge? And if we're not, then yeah, how much? What kind of fridge could they afford? You know, currently we've got, was it $800 is the cheapest solar-powered fridge. Maybe they pay over a year or 2 years. So I think we're still at that problem. What is it? And quite bluntly, we're all here with electricity. What about the Zia pot, which has been pioneered, I think, Rolex award win, but it's basically a clay pot on a bit of water. The water is sucked up into the clay pot, is evaporated, you put fruit inside it, it gets 4 to 6 degrees cooler than the surrounding room, costs $3. Put sand outside, put water in that, lasts a bit longer. So there are many other solutions yet, and that's what I mean by having the attention on the cooling. It would be great just to see some thorough studies of how does one get cold, what are the ways to get cold, what are the implications and the parameters of the cost, the cultural, and just to have more of that kind of study first, although we are here and we're working on electricity. And then the same with electricity. Is it your phase change material fridge? Is it a regular fridge? Is it not a fridge? Is it a ice being sold as a local business, productive use opportunity in the hub with super efficient cooling boxes? I'm overwhelmed by how many questions there are once we start to ask this. There's a lot of great work coming into the research to find it. And that's why I think it needs that rallying call that Sustainable Cooling for All has been doing to define and to crowd everyone in. But maybe we are just at the beginning, so it's hard to answer that exactly. But yes, when it is affordable and when people are willing to pay, absolutely we need more financing. And that's why we're calling it this, and it should be integrated. That's part of what we're talking about. When you have energy access programs, as I said in Pakistan, they realized they had to bring in a fan. And so in some cases, maybe that's what we're going to need, that you need to bring in a cooling device. And then it can be financed through the existing channels.
Thank you, Leo. I know you have another session after this as well, so we can explore that later as well. Riley, the numbers are up, and after this, I'd like to see some hands up for some questions so we can hear your voices as well. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm realizing now this is maybe a little bit hard to read, but I'm sure, especially if you were in the first PUE session this morning, you already heard the results of the work we did at class with 60 decibels on off-grid refrigerator customers. So we performed interviews with over 1,500 off-grid refrigerator customers, and they were users of Global Leap Awards winners and finalists through our results-based financing program. And we interviewed customers between 2018 and 2022 in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And I'm just going to quickly walk through some of the main findings that we saw. So first, looking at user profile, we saw that half of the users were living below the poverty line. 84% were first-time users of an off-grid refrigerator, and this suggests that these companies were reaching underserved consumer bases. 83% said that they didn't have access to alternatives, so this was the only off-grid refrigerator available to them to purchase. No choices for other brands or models, so little competition as well. In terms of usage and impact, we saw that 79% of customers use their refrigerator for income-generating activities, and this was really impactful. 83% saw an improved quality of life, and 37% saw an extreme improved quality of life. And this is mostly due to improved income and businesses. And then lastly, looking at satisfaction and experience, 82% of users rated their refrigerator good or very good value for money, but 50% of users said that they had to make unacceptable sacrifices to pay their loan for the off-grid refrigerator. Looking at challenges, we saw that 28% had experienced some type of issue with their off-grid refrigerator, and this is primarily from the refrigerator parts and battery. And many of the customers who had these challenges also did not have their issues resolved. So we recommend you to read the report. There's lots of more interesting findings in there, but hopefully this just gives a good overview of what we're seeing, and also just how important user experience is for us to understand the impact of off-grid refrigerators and what more we can be doing as well.
Thank you, Riley, for that. I'd like to take some questions from the floor as we log back into Slido. So any hands up? We've got some microphones that can be shared. Even if you posted your question on Slido, please feel free to raise it. There's a hand up there.
We've got some microphones at the front if needed.
Thank you, Ben.
Hi everyone, my name is Mary Kithenji. I work for AECF, and I think this is a really interesting conversation here, especially because for us, we try to see how we stimulate the market so that we really get innovative products, delivering energy access for those people who are off-grid and really need these products. So my question, it's more of a comment and a bit of a question in here. So we got these projects that we're doing where we're investing in women, and we're trying to see how we can stimulate value chains where women can actually either become the business owners or deliver real value. And so the two key value chains is agriculture and there is the blue economy. And in Kenya specifically, we're trying to see how we stimulate women to actually come up along the coast and in Kisumu. And if you think about the value chain, the blue economy, women play a real part where they clean the fish, they sort it, but they don't have the right maybe cooling technologies. They're expensive, and they have to find innovative ways to come up and own cooling products around that value chain. So I think that this is a really good conversation that really fits into what we see as a future of investing in women and supporting the increased incomes that you're talking about. So my real question here is, how do you see the future of, how do we get cooling into the policy conversation so that we really have very targeted discussions that say, how do we make sure that women or people who are in marginalized communities can access these cooling technologies along these value chains, whether it's agriculture or a blue economy or any other value chain that's important, and how do we stimulate that conversation? I think it's really important to start considering linking the policy needs, the policy changes to how these target groups can actually benefit from the immense value we see from cooling. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to bring it to Maurice and also mention that there's very few African countries in the NDCs that they actually have cooling as part of the response and action. So over to you on how we can actually bring this into policy.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I mean, cooling has been looked at, from the beginning as a way to to cut down on emissions, rather than what does it actually do in the lives of people. And you will see that the countries that have it in their NDCs, or very few have them in their strategies or national plans, it will be talking about reduction of HFCs, controlling the energy consumption of equipment, but not really looking at how is it mainstreamed into the lives of people and how does it actually support the economic development or the health. And the government of Rwanda has actually done an excellent job by putting in place the national cooling strategy. It looks at all of these components. It looks at, first of all, how do we cool sustainably? How do we make sure that it does not contribute to environment degradation? How do we ensure that there controls minimum energy performance standards? How do we ensure that the refrigerant gases used are environmentally friendly? Then it's also looking at the financing. How do you actually finance cooling? How do you make sure that it's affordable? But it's also looking at all that we've been talking about. How do you ensure that there's a cold chain? How do you ensure that it affects people in the rural communities so they can be able to actually transport their food, add a few more days on the shelves, make sure that it's actually increasing the production. So these discussions need to happen. I don't know any other country that, at least in the region, that has cooling in its national policy. I know Rwanda has a national cooling strategy. I know some countries have them in the NDCs. But actually, like we do have, most of the countries have a rural electrification plan, a rural electrification strategy. We don't have an equivalent in cooling. So these are discussions that really, really need to happen.
Thank you. Happy to have another question from the floor.
If I could just add something, there's an interesting dimension on gender. Sure. And another factor to consider is the time that women in the rural areas spend on care work, collecting firewood, collecting water. If you have refrigeration, you can cut down that time because you don't have to do it every other day. And that creates opportunities to do more productive engagements.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. And I do believe the microphone is at the, yes, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jakub Verban from Energy Saving Trust. And we all know that climate change is accelerating, heat waves are becoming more common. So my question is, what is the role of grid air conditioners, especially for public institutions in rural areas?
Thank you. That's a good question. From the panel, anyone who wants to go first, then we can add on to it. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you, Jacob. Great question. And I'd say trying to answer a few others as well, maybe link it back to comments that were made earlier, and reflecting on our experience as a sector. So bottom line was at the beginning of all of this off-grid energy access work, those of us, if you didn't know the benefits, you didn't believe the benefits, they were toys. These solar lamps, even a kit was a toy. We spent years overcoming that, and we realized you needed metrics, you needed performance metrics, you needed to get the data, get the hard evidence of what's the benefit from those. What it seems to be that, obviously, maybe we're in the same place now with cooling. You need to quantify the benefits of cooling. And I'm not clear how well that's been done already. There's a little bit of it, but for example, so it would be important to see in those institutions, are the governments, the ministries of health, Ministry of Education, aware of some of these statistics that we're seeing? And do they have enough money to also install cooling solutions, of course? And if they have to choose between books and fans, so some hard choices would have to be made, clearly. But when we are already introducing electrification systems, when Andrew's doing his assessment and we're sizing it, did they think about fans or no? Because it's a rural area. They're lucky enough to have light after night. To that point of entitlement, what is the bare minimum? And so maybe we need to accept that cooling is needed first, need to quantify it, and yeah, whether it's productive use, suffering kids aren't thinking so well, they're less productive. When you work, you're hotter, you're less productive, etc. As well as the same goes for the food. And I'd just take in there to add, this problem that we haven't got a methodology apparently for, is that when you have food waste, what are the emissions of that food waste? And how can you monetize that? And the carbon credits comment that came earlier. There actually is not an accepted methodology of how to sell the emissions benefit after you've had your solar cooling system. So I think that's an area a few of us are looking into. And so maybe the same with those stakeholders of you, I think might still have UNICEF in the room, might have World Food Programme, you know, some of these large international bodies, FAO, IFAD has funded some of this work. Maybe that's where we need our friends in the other sectors, and we need to agitate to them to give us more data.
I think that's fantastic. And also there's the aspect that I think we all mentioned, that you go to the most rural area in Africa and you'll find a refrigerator selling sodas. And yet we've gone through COVID, and then the public hospitals issue around cooling comes up again. So it links to a lot of what we're going through and the opportunities. There's challenges that you've mentioned, but there's opportunities as well. I'll take one more question from the floor, although I saw two hands. Please go ahead. Okay. Oh, there's yes, just, thank you. Thank you, Raul.
I think there's a lag time.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you. My name is Ravindra. I am representing Ecozen Solutions from India. So I have already asked this question on Slido, but still thought to have a direct communication. One of the point which is currently in a discussion is affordability of off-grid cooling solutions. And everybody here understands that these off-grid cooling solutions have great impact not only on social or environmental factors, but even economic growth of the country. However, it is being observed that from our experiences that in different countries there are few factors which are contributing to the high cost of these off-grid cooling solutions. One of the factor is the duty structure or taxes in the country, which are making it a bit expensive for users. And second is a lack of policies on cooling side. So I congratulate the Rwanda government for having national cooling as a policy, but I do not see the same policy in other countries. Okay. So the one question is there any possibility to get better tax structure on these cooling solutions, looking at benefits they are offering on social, environmental and economic conditions? And if there are benefits, can that benefit be passed on to offer subsidy to the users so that these models can be scaled up in the country? Probably Andrew or Maurice, this question is for you. Thank you.
Thank you. And in a room full of renewable energy people, and at some point there was tax-free imports of renewable energy goods, I think there's a structure there. Would you like to respond to that? Maybe Maurice, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question. And it shows where the problem lies. a lot of countries in Africa, you will find that solar systems are free of taxes. You don't find anything like that in cooling, anywhere. And you know the reason? It's because they think it's a luxury. If it's a luxury, you're going to pay taxes for that. And I think it's upon all of us, the organizations here, that do understand to actually bring up awareness. This awareness needs to come up to a level where policymakers start to look at cooling and say, look, wait, this is a basic need. When they start to understand that it's a basic need, you actually see a lot of exemptions happening. At this point, if you tell them, when we were developing the national cooling strategy here, we actually did approach the government and we said, we think there should be tax exemptions here. They were like, no, we don't think so. We think if people can afford, let them buy efficient, you know. So it was towards efficiency more than, you know, actually telling people the need. The government wanted to act, it did act, but it was really futuristic, wasn't something that actually does affect people's lives now. But we know it's now. So it's really mainly about awareness that needs to raise to a certain level. Once policymakers have that awareness, we will see all of these policies happening.
Thank you. So the task is upon all of us to really raise awareness on this discussion around cooling in the various aspects. I see we have another hand up. The gentleman there, I think, Ben, you have the microphone just at the back there. Yes. Thank you.
How are you? Paul Maloney. I'm actually new to this realm. I come from a semiconductor manufacturing optimization and efficiency background and an investing background. I just wanted to give a hat tip to the thought leadership on stage, but also all the folks in the audience who are working on these challenges. In my financial mind, in my investment mind, this is interesting because when I started to get educated on these issues from Selchuk and others at World Bank IFC, I started paying attention to food waste, food loss, and when you combine them, if we're throwing away a third of all food that's produced after it's been sold in markets, restaurants, and to people's homes, and we're losing 40% of all food that's grown before it gets to market, has no chance to make it to a mouth, we're growing 3 times as much food as necessary to feed people. And David Beasley of the World Food Program tells us there are 800 more million people this year on the brink of starvation. So you mentioned what is the emissions profile. I think one of the UNEP directors pointed out that if food loss and waste were a country, the emissions profile would be the 3rd largest in the world. So these are staggering factors. So what I kind of wanted to ask was, it seems to me there's maybe not enough money in government to tackle these problems, and there's not enough money in philanthropy to tackle these problems. But I do believe there's enough money in private capital to tackle these problems. So I know everyone here is working very hard on the challenges, but I would just sort of ask the question, what are the things that need to be done to create a greater awareness, to draw in the private capital that can fund these solutions and advancements, and maybe the LED moment is just a realization. It may not be technological. It may be the realization growing 3 times as much food as necessary to feed the world. And you talk about soil depletion, emissions, water, 3 times the volume of Lake Geneva every year is consumed for food that never makes it to a mouth. So I just wanted to ask what needs to be done to draw in significant private capital with returns that are acceptable, because it seems they should be at a 3-to-1, 3x ratio.
Fantastic, and you know, it brings us back to the opportunities, and we'll use that as the parting shots from the panelists. Thank you for that. And the parting shot we'll start with is with Ben. You have the microphone. I think there was a question around where we can find the Chilling Prospects report, and probably there was a reference on the OG cooling Virasol and SE4All data that was used. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'll just very quickly, you can find the Chilling Prospects reports at se4all.org. Learn more about our program there, also at thisiscool.se4all.org. You'll find also a product that we did with CLASP a few years ago on the off-grid, on multi-tier framework for off-grid cooling appliances, which is really intended as an advocacy piece. I know we're over time, so I'm going to stop there, but I'm around after if anyone wants to chat.
Thank you. And there's also the session that will be after this. I know Leo will talk about it. So coming up to Leo, walking back this way for the last parting shot. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd say I'll take a leaf out of what brought us this here with Paul's very great question there, and the overall challenges that we're facing here is that we recognize there's a need to inform, to draw in attention, to advocate, so to have like the flashing neon light. What is the opportunity? It's still not clear. We're clear on their challenges. So is it an opportunity, all of these suffering people, to sell to, or is it an opportunity? Is it another burden that the government needs to take as public infrastructure? Still, I think too many questions are unanswered. What I think we're just doing here is calling for more time and attention and money to be spent on it, not as a nice to have, not as a luxury. This issue is not a luxury, and the impact on people is not. And so, but we can't answer that yet. I hope others can help us do that. Please come do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Over to you, Riley.
I'm from a QA and technology perspective, so I'm going to say improving the quality of products will be very important to getting investors interested in those products, and then continuing to improve technologies. It's extremely difficult to optimize efficiency and price, so continued research development will be key to improving that.
Thank you. Morris?
Yeah, I would say also, a lot of work that I've seen put in by the government in terms of regulation has actually helped a lot to improve push on the edge of technology. So U4E is, for example, developing the model guidelines for off-grid systems, and that would help actually indicate what push we can be able to get in terms of technology, because I believe if you improve the technology, of course awareness comes number one, but then when we have technologies that are affordable, more efficient, then we will see people getting interested, and it will raise awareness.
Thank you. Andy?
I think I would say all the above, and on top of that, I put aggregation and business models. I would say we can do with cooling what we did or what was done with transportation and Uber and Airbnb. You could have national storage, decentralized, distributed, data-driven in a circular economy. I think it can work. We have to have awareness, we have to have standards.
Thank you, Andy, for that. And that's quite disruptive as well, and we're ready for it. We've been there. Just as a parting shot, thank you very much for joining us. And one person came for one session and got converted, and once opportunities and solutions, I think we've done a great job on this session to bring that awareness. Second part is between now and COP27, great opportunity for remaining engaged as we find these solutions. And lastly, there's a cold storage market readiness session here at 3:45. So opportunity to bring more questions, and I think, Leo, you're moderating that, so we can carry on having this conversation. Thank you all.